Welcome to the Moonlit Music Group channel. Today we're talking about how to mix drums that rock. Obviously we're talking about acoustic drums today in the context of rock. Full-on drum recordings. When I went to study with Chris Algi at Mix with the Masters, everybody received one of these notebooks. And if you know anything about Chris Algi, in his mind, the heart and soul of rock music is always in the drums. He's very, very passionate about making sure the drums and the drum recordings are absolute stunners. So inside this book is every piece of information he shared about how to record a drum kit, how to mix a drum kit, and when I did my master's degree in sound design, my thesis was recording a drum sample library with all of the information that Chris Algi had provided on that trip. Also locked in this weighty tome are all of my notes while I was recording and writing my thesis. Long story short, this novella here is an absolute masterclass on how to record and mix kick-ass drums. So this won't be the only video I do on drums, but we're gonna start off with mixing drums that rock with drum recordings that are really not that great. No offense to whoever recorded them. And the reason is because when you experience and overcome a non-optimal situation, it gives you a very good picture on what's important in that recording phase to make that mixing phase a cinch. In order to demonstrate how to truly mix drums that rock, we're gonna have to break this series down into 3 different episodes. This first episode is gonna be about the kick drum and the overheads and relationship between the drums and the mix bus compressor to just lay the foundation for the rest of the elements to come together. Not only the rest of the elements meaning the drums, but the song itself. On the second episode, we'll be looking at the snare, always the star of the show, and then take a look at the spatial microphones, the room microphones, and the possibility of adding any reverb to really bring the whole sound together. And in the final episode, we'll bring in the toms, we'll apply the sort of final coat of varnish, fine-tune any little details, and then take a look at where we started and where we arrived and how far we've come, even if our starting point wasn't the most ideal situation that we'd look for. The drums set the stage for every rock song. Building a great foundation is the key to building a great house, and that's what you're going to learn today. How to build a great foundation with even a lackluster drum recording. Let's get started. This demo and learning how to mix these drums so that they rock, even when the recordings aren't optimal, is going to give you some insight on what constitutes a good drum recording so that when you are recording drums, you know what the needs are, what it takes to be successful, and what makes the mixing process more and more and more effortless. And I'll touch on a couple different things as we're mixing these drums just to sort of illustrate that. So the first thing we're going to pull up here are the overheads. And the reason we're starting with the overheads is because the overheads are the stage for the song and for the drums. They set the stage for the entire record. They are the most important microphones on the drum, period, full stop, end of story. When you're recording your overheads and when you're having an overhead sound, what we're listening for when we're bringing this up is that, does the snare have good representation? Your snare needs to be the star of the show in your drum kit no matter what happens, because nobody ever said, wow, there's not enough cymbal in here. So you want your overheads to not only be picking up a strong snare, but you want them to sound like a recording of the kit in the space without sounding like a, room mic. So let's take a listen to that and see what that sounds like and how we can help it what it needs. So you can see there's some snare in there. It is very cymbal heavy, which is a lot easier to do than anything else when it comes to, a drum overhead recording. We're getting some decent kick, we're getting some decent snare, but it's pretty much almost a room mic. Regardless of that, let's throw an EQ on here and let's just sort of dive into what we can kind of do to accentuate, some of the things we may want to bring out. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a little bit of bottom off. 90, 120, it's not a perfect science, just to get rid of anything that's we'll let the kick deal with that low end. So let's go all the way to 120, shall we? And then get some of that 350, that 400, where you're just getting so much of that room echo, and just dip that a little bit. This is just setting us up, right? It's a very narrow cut. It's just a little bit of that. it's so consistent that there's no clarity and there's no envelope to it. And we're just ducking it down a little bit. And bear in mind on this SSL, just because you see it's just under 1K, doesn't mean that that's actually what we're EQing. Between 0.3 and 0.8 can sometimes still be like 300 hertz. These are not accurate representations. So don't look at this and be like, oh, he's cutting 900 hertz. It could be fucking anything. I don't actually give a shit what it is. I just care about what sound I'm dipping. Rather than boost something with the snare, let's find that really sharp sound of that cymbal and let's cut that out a bit. I like what dipping 3K is doing there. It's just taking a little bit of that edge off the cymbal, and now we can turn up some of that air and just brighten up the sound of those cymbals. So you see we're getting a nice edgy sound of the cymbal, but it's in a higher order it's in a higher frequency range, which is sort of nicer. So my strategy with overheads is mix it. Like I almost try to mimic the snare mixing, at least on the like bottom end and the mid range. And then the top end is kind of like dealing with the cymbals. So I'm going to find that fundamental real like beef of that snare, which is usually somewhere between like 140 and maybe 220, and just see if I can't get some of that out of the actual overhead recording. This is a bell. This is not a shelf. There we go. And I'm having to boost it quite a bit to really feel the weight of that, because they're very, very bright microphones and there isn't a lot of that snare in there. So we're really trying to, good for us, it's not really rumbly. Now that we have those overheads dialed in, I'm actually going to bring them all the way down. So the strategy we're going to be going for here is like we have that overheads, that's going to set the stage for our entire kit. And now we just need to dial in and sort of find out what's great about the other drums and then just try to merge them all together. First, I just want to listen to, what does the kick sound like? What does the snare sound like? Do we need to do any sample replacement, any sample additions, et cetera, et cetera? So here's what the kick sounds like. We'll start there. Crap, right? And the reason is because it's clipping. And when you're clipping your kick recording, you're losing all of the transient, you're losing all of the weight, you're losing all of everything. It literally just sounds like a click. So I have an instantiation of trigger already loaded up on here with a sample. So I'm replacing this kick with a sample. It sounds okay in the overheads, but it's not got the juice in the recording. Much better, right? Especially for this kind of genre, you can tell with the double kick going a lot. We're in the sort of like heavier rock genre. So we have a lot of click in that kick already. And usually, you'll do a bell, maybe like 8 to 12K, something like that, to get a lot of that click in there. But we have so much of it already. So let's try to find some meat and potatoes. Let's get some, there's not a lot of low end in that kick. So let's get some low end out of there. So this is a shelf. We're shelving up the low end. Scooping just a touch of that cardboardy sound in there. You can hear that area is like not really nice. Drums is like probably one of the more surgical things that I'll EQ, not so much vocals. It's just like trying to focus the transients so that everything's kind of popping out nicely. Put a touch more click in there, mainly for the genre, more than anything else. You want that snap in there. And then sometimes it's good to take just a touch of that low end out. I'm just going to put that on 20 hertz just to focus the kick a little bit more. We could use this SSL compressor on here. I'm going to do just a touch of compression. It's already pretty smacked, so I don't want to go crazy, but I'm going to throw my favorite kick compressor on here. If I could only find it, DVX 160X. I like this one. So just 3 to 1. I'm not going to bring any output gain in. Nothing crazy. We're just feathering that gain reduction just a little bit, squeezing a little bit of pop out of that. Drum mixing is really all about taking the overhead sound and using all of the close mics to supplement the sound of that room. Bring the closeness and the impact and that upfront nature to that stage we've set with the overheads. Now that we're here, the mixing starts. This is how I start every mix that has an organic drum set in it. And now we're going to set the stage for our entire mix. So we're going to bring all that back down. And since I use an external compressor, I'm going to bypass it. I'm just going to ignore my whole sort of like hybrid analog sort of chain here. And I'm going to put an SSL bus compressor on here, so you can see what I'm doing and how everything in this mix is going to be built around the drums. Bring the threshold down to the max, no makeup gain, fast release, slow attack. This is like the standard SSLG bus compressor settings here. The threshold you can't really say is standard, but how I gain stage my sessions, this is ideal. Maybe even let's just go here for the sake of simplicity. And the reason I'm doing any makeup gain is I'm not trying to get gain out of anything. I'm really just trying to use this as like the glue of the mix bus compressor, whatever you want, whatever terminology you like. So now that we have this up here, I'm going to bring that kick up, just the kick, not the overheads, until I start to see it feather that compressor in the same way it was feathering the DBX. And then once we're doing that, then we know that that kick is sitting right at that threshold of that compressor or just past it. And it's the thing that's probably going to impact and hit the compressor the most relative to everything else. So this is a good way to sort of lay that foundation of the kick is right at the threshold. So if I bring everything into the mix in relationship to that kick, we're sitting right there at the point where the compressor is starting to work. And then everything else gains the sort of relativity to that heartbeat of the song. See that? Bear in mind, we don't need to be slamming the shit out of this needle right now, because now that this kick is going through here, everything that we add will continue to push that compressor further and further and further. So we're really just trying to sit it right there. We can make minor adjustments later if we need to, if we need a little bit more, a little bit less, whatever. But we're setting that stage. And now we bring those overheads until they're tasteful with that kick. And we're setting that stage, and then we can start bringing in all the other individual elements. So now that the overheads were in there, the compressor started to push a little bit more. So I just dialed that dry kick back a little bit just to match the kick information that's in that overhead sound. We don't want to lose that energy because we sample replace the kick. So we want some of that natural fidelity, that natural sound that it came with on that big recording. We just needed more impact out of the dry. This is where everything starts. The relationship between the kick and the overheads gives us relativity for all the other elements of the mix to come together around what those levels are set at and how they're influencing that mix bus compressor. You'll notice a pattern in the drum mixing that I don't feel like I explain necessarily as well as I'd like to in the recordings of me working in the DAW. So I'm going to just really define it for you here. The strategy I go for and the strategy I've been taught is that You're highlighting the elements of the drum that really make it work, that really make it shine. What boosts and any slight cuts does it really amplify the elements of the drums that are impactful and powerful. And then we want to compress after that EQ so that we're defining the envelope of the drums around those frequency areas that really make it powerful. Compress and define the envelope of the drums around what makes it work. And you'll notice this pattern reoccurring as I EQ and compress every subsequent drum. Transients bring music to life. This is how we can position the transients to be the best that they can be. As I said before, in the next episode, we'll be taking a look at the snare, the room mics, any cymbal mics, and then how we can use reverb to coalesce everything together before we get on to the next step of toms and polish. See you there.